Okay, we're going to get started back. This is page 9. So as Bill went back into the hospital, and here, this is where Ebby comes into his life. Second paragraph. And as a matter of fact, the last paragraph on page 8, it says, near the end of the bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen with a certain satisfaction. I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember him coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was the time that chartered this airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. And basically, Abby comes to him as a result of being helped by Roland H., Shep Cornell, and Seba Graves. And Bill and Abby were childhood friends. They grew up drinking. And he had made the statement if he ever got bad at Abby, he would quit. Well, there, of course, Abby had been helped through Roland Hazard and eventually in the Calvary Mission there in New York. And he heard about Bill, so he came to talk to his old friend Bill. And this is the story of that. And he says, the door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot, now I suspected, a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. He says he did no ranting. In a matter of fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly, I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. And then he drops down, and this next paragraph talks about his grandfather's emphasis on his belief. His grandfather, Griffith. He didn't believe in organized religion, but he always believed in a power greater than himself. And what he had told Bill was that no man had the right to tell another man how the spirits made their music. In other words, you didn't have the right to tell me how I should believe. Everyone should have their own belief. And Bill was raised with this. He was not an atheist, but he did not believe in organized religion. And this next paragraph is going to emphasize that. He says, I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are. For that means blind faith in a strange proposition that the universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and a rhythm underlay it all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe, who knows neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone. And then he goes on to say, the page 11, paragraph 3. Now here it is, Ebby mentioned religion, but he says he was aghast. But he couldn't reconcile this in his head because at the same time, him thinking that Ebby had religion, which it really wasn't, but he was still smitten with the fact that Ebby was sitting there. He says, but my friend sat before me, and he made a point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all. That floored me. Now he's going to talk about what he really saw. He says, that floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind about the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more inwardly reorganized. Now here it is. He's talking about the personality change. He had been used to, he and Ebby, sitting talking about drinking, talking about the old days, quipping about some of their trips that they had gone on. But here Ebby was not talking about any of that. Ebby had a complete and total personality change. And he saw that inwardly within Ebby. And remember what Dr. Silkworth says about the explanation of our problem and also the solution. He said it must have depth and weight. So we're talking about attraction rather than promotion. And what Ebby had in him attracted Bill. And he's going to go on to say, he was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was impressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conception as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. My friend suggested what then seems a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And right then, the conversation moved from religion to spirituality. Because basically what he was saying, Bill, is, Bill, you don't have to believe as I believe. The only thing that you have to do is believe in a power greater than yourself. And then he said, that statement hit me hard. It had melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered for many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus I was convinced that God was concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. Now, is he talking about a world of coming into view of his physical eyes? Of course not. He's talking about his mind's eyesight. What has happened in his mind? He never was physically blind, but he was psychologically and spiritually blind. So now he's looking at things from a totally different view. He said, the real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. See, it came back to him. And he says, for a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so had it been ever since, how blind I had been. So the point is this. Bill had done nothing to do with the resentments, the fear, the guilt and remorse, to hang on to this awareness that he had. Now, what he's going to do, and keep in mind that he also had this spiritual experience in the hospital bed. Now, the next page, page 13, is here he is, he's going to define the steps. Okay, Victor.
At the hospital, I was separated for alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. Therefore, I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood him, to do with me as he would.
Now, what step is that?
That's step 3.
All right. Go ahead.
I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away.
But what step is that?
Root and branch. 4. I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies.
What step is that?
Step 5. We made a list of people I had hurt or towards whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability.
What step is that?
8, 9. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense.
What step is that?
10.
10.
I was able to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me.
What step is that? 11.
Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive. But that would be in great measure.
Let's continue in step 11. Keep reading.
My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems.
Now, what step is that? 12. Keep reading.
Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light, who presides over us all.
Some things.
All things.
All things. Keep reading.
These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up, as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others.
Now, this next paragraph on to the next page is the beginning of what Bill should do to enlarge his spiritual life or his spiritual house. It says, my friend had emphasized, and look at the words he's using, emphasize the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly, it was imperative to make 90 meetings in 90 days. It doesn't say that. To work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to make 90 meetings in 90 days, failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain low spots ahead. And if he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. And then he says, my wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of forming a fellowship. No, helping other alcoholics to a solution to their problems. Since it was unfortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, doing which I found little work. Now, next paragraph. No, we're going to keep this one. It was fortunate for my old business associate remained skeptical for a year and a half, doing what I found little work. I was not too well at the time. I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. But I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I had gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to another man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It was a design for living that works in rough going. See, now he calls it a design for living. He says, we commenced to make many a fast friends, and as a result of the program, a fellowship arose up. And he says, which is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, and have seen the most impossible domestic situation righted. Feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. Now he's going to talk about why we meet. Now remember, the program produced a fellowship. People think that we make meetings to stay sober. But he's going to define that here in the next sentences. He says, we meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship that they seek. If it was not for the people that were sober as a result of the program, there would be no fellowship. But the program produces sobriety, And the fellowship produces a mechanism for the newcomers to find it so they can hear the message of recovery. And the message of recovery is simple as this: having had a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. The old version says we try to carry this message to others, and especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. That is the message that we carry. That as a result of the steps, we've had a spiritual awakening. It is simple as that. So when the newcomer comes to the fellowship, that's what they should hearing is a message of recovery, because it is the only mechanism that's going to carry this message. And then it says they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We're growing in numbers and power. And he uses that asterisk to talk about the growth of AA. Now let's look at this. We've talked about the problem, which is step one. And we talked about the twofoldness of that problem. And we talked about that problem is powerless. And we look over here at step two, which is the solution, which we're going to go to on page 17. The solution is also twofold. One part of the solution is an AA fellowship. There is power in numbers. All of us in the room do produces an inordinate amount of power than one of us could. But what we have in the room is human power. And we need that because this AA fellowship over here, what it does is that the fellowship produces meetings, whereas we find sponsors in meetings. This mechanism here is the mechanism that carries the message of recovery. The only place you're going to get the message is in the fellowship. Can't get it in church, can't get it anywhere else. And this message supports us for a temporary period. That's why when you come to meetings and people be talking about the same problem, it supports us for a while. But in this message, the message is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of the AA program. Which is the 12 steps. Now, this produces a personality change. That's sufficient to recover, and this personality change is the one that produces recovery. Recovery doesn't happen over here. This message talks about the 12 steps. Those two together. Now this one also not only produces a personality change, but it also produces a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. This does not produce a spiritual awakening. The steps is the one that produces spiritual awakening. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, we try to carry this message, the message of a spiritual awakening, to the newcomers in the fellowship. And by carrying this message, they can recover from this problem. It's as simple as that. This is a fact, and this is a fact. I want you to read page 17, Victor. On page 17.
Chapter chapter 2, there is a solution.
Mm-hmm.
We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans, or Britons. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table.
Now, one of the most pronounced examples of that was seen by myself and a couple other people in 1994. And what I'm talking about is the part which says we were people who normally wouldn't mix. 1994, Joe and Charlie did a big book study in Belfast, Ireland. And for the first time, I choose to believe it was because of them doing the big book study there. And this can be verified by history. But for the first time in many years, there was a ceasefire. And I believe it's because they were there, because they were sitting there and they had Catholics and Protestants sitting at the big book study. Because of the nature and the power of this program, it caused people to come together that normally wouldn't mix. And they held that big book study there, and there was a ceasefire for approximately over a week, almost 2 weeks. And the moment they left, 2 days after they left, they found a bomb on the tarmac of Heathrow Airport. And it started back over. Now you're talking about the power that is invested in this program. Just the power of the program caused those people to come together for that weekend, for that big book study. I never forgot that, because I was watching it, and Joe and I had discussed this, and he was wondering whether he should go. But whoever put it together had assured him and Charlie that they had an agreement from parts of the government that that area would, but not only that that area was safe, it completely and totally they had a ceasefire because those two alcoholics were there. And that was an amazing feat. And I called them and told them, I said, look, I don't know if you all realize what has really happened, but I firmly believe it's because that you and Charlie are there that they had the ceasefire. But it started back up afterwards. But for that moment of time, they were safe and protected doing that big book study there in Ireland, because of the message that they were carrying to those people. And this was the power, not this one. This power brought them all together, even though they had difference in how they went about to look at this power, but this power set them down together in a big book study, which was an amazing feat. No man could have done that, not even Charlie and Joe. But the power of this program that we're talking about, if it can do that, guess what it can do with your little obsession? So therefore, keep reading, Victor.
And he continues to say, unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways.
Mm-hmm.
The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us.
That's this problem, one element.
But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined.
Mm-hmm.
The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution.
Mm-hmm.
We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action.
See, there's the actions again. This is a program of action. You can't just sit around the meetings and expect something to rub off on you. There are some steps we have to take. And normally when you hear that word harmonious, it's attached to harmonious love. But we're talking about harmonious actions. That means that the same actions that the first 100 took to achieve the sobriety, and when I'm talking about sobriety, here's a term I'm going to institute, and you're going to hear me use the rest of the session. We're not talking about physical sobriety. We're talking about emotional sobriety. Emotional stability. We're talking about learning a way of life where it keeps the emotion barometer to a point where it's not necessary to trigger the obsession, and the obsession will not trigger the first drink, and the first drink will not trigger the craving. You see, there's a succession that happens. Emotional buildup, through emotional instability, or through emotional immaturity, or not having the emotional sobriety, then it triggers the obsession, because once the emotions build up, our minds are so situated in a way where we're going to have to look for a solution. We're not going to sit there and be inundated in a problem and not be looking for a solution. But the only solution that we have is to take a drink, or to curse, or to get mad, or to have fear. We do not have a spiritual solution as of yet. That happens as a result of the harmonious action that we're talking about. Next page, top of page 18.
An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness.
Now, we talked about that yesterday, about the illness. This is not only a physical and a mental illness. Now we learn it is also of a spiritual nature. Keep reading.
It involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all the things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished.
Keep reading.
That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, and that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured.
We can see from this that this is part of our preamble. Keep reading.
These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. None of us makes a sole vocation of this work. Do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did? We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning.
Now, see, the elimination of the drinking, being separated from the drink, that's only the beginning. In actuality, the work comes when we're dealing with the unmanageability of life, while we're making heavy going of life. That is something that is best done when we are sober in the body. Of course, we cannot do that if we're still in our cups. It's hard to get sober while you're still drinking. You see, a sick mind can't fix a sick mind. And remember, Silkworth says our body is sickened as well as the mind. We have to come to the grips is that we have something in us that causes us to believe a lie, for us to go back and take a drink when we're sitting here free of alcohol. But something within us causes us to believe a lie and say this time is going to be different. And you know what? It really is different, but it's worse. Never gets better, it gets worse. So when we're looking at these two facts, the problem is a fact, the solution is a fact. And how we're sitting here looking at these two facts. I'm going to jump forward, then I'm going to come back because there's an emphasis that I want to make here. I want you to turn your big books to page 60.
ABCs.
And I want you to look at the ABCs. Because when we're looking at two facts, a decision is gathering the facts and choosing a course of action. But they have to be facts, not feelings. Read the ABCs, Victor.
Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas.
Now, our description of the alcoholic is the doctor's opinion. The chapter to the agnostic is precisely that, the chapter to the agnostic. Our personal adventures before and after, that's Bill's story. So, the doctor's opinion, the chapter to the agnostic, and Bill's stories make clear three pertinent ideas. And as he is reading, I would like for everybody to look up here. Go ahead, Victor.
A,
right here.
that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives.
That's A. This is a problem. Read.
B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism.
This is B. This is a human power. This cannot relieve your alcoholism.
C,
And this is C.
that God could and would if he were sought.
Now, step one, step two, and then he says, being convinced, read.
We were at step 3.
If you're not convinced, in the old version says, if you're not convinced of these three vital issues, you need to reread the book to this point and else throw it away. Don't even try to go to step 3. That's the ABCs of alcoholism. Now, if you're convinced, keep reading.
Being convinced we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God.
Is our thinking.
Over to God as we understood him.
Our lives, our actions. You see, our thinking controls our actions. So as a man thinketh, so will he be. We're going to talk about this as the rest of it. How you feel is as a result of your thinking. If you feel messed up, then your thinking is messed up. Today we're going to learn that no one else has control of our thinking unless we give it over to them. We say that people cause us to get mad. No, we make a decision to get mad. And in the case, remember I was talking about intellect over emotions. If we allow people to cause us to get mad, that's a lot of power you're often giving up to another person. You see, our thinking controls our feelings, and our feelings control our actions. And when we turn our thinking, now I want you to consider this. Why would you turn your thinking over to a sick person? And why not give it to God? We'd rather give it to some sick person than to give it over to a power greater than yourself. Now, this power greater than ourselves is merely just something simple. Doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to believe in Moses parted the Red Sea. You don't have to believe in all that. The only thing you have to do is just believe a little bit different than what you're believing. And that's not a hard thing to do. When we look at this room or this great hotel, we look at a power that is great, and that's electricity. That power, if not harnessed, to be able to be used in a safe way is destructive. It will kill you. But that power is harnessed in a way where we use it every day. Don't need to know how it works. We just know that it works. Flip a switch and we use it. This power that we're talking about, you see, we're just vessels. You see, this is a mechanism. But if the power is removed, it is of no use. So this thing has power in it. Just as simple as that, use of power. And this power is harnessed in a way where you can use it safely. There's another power that's greater than us. We use every day. It's used unto life. But too much of this power not harnessed, it will kill you. These are powers greater than ourselves. So now we're going to learn that we have a power within us that's called self. And this power left unchecked will cause great heartache and great damage. It is a power that's supposed to be used unto life, unto socialization, unto security, unto reproduction of life. But if left unchecked and used on our own volition, through our own thinking, our own feelings and emotions, it is, to say the least, a damning power. It will kill us. So what Bill is going to show us in the next chapter, and that is how it works. Not how you work, how it works. Because once we align ourselves with it and how it works, we work better. The problem is that we've been doing it our own way for years. And by doing it our own way, guess what? We've almost killed ourselves. Because this power that we have, our thinking, self-will, has been left unchecked. We've been doing it our own thing, so to speak. So in the next few pages, he's going to explain in 1937 and 39, when the book was published, he's going to explain what self is about. And as we're reading this, I want you to look at all the variations he's going to use self. But then after we read this, then he's going to do a much more greater in-depth detailed explanation of self after he's been sober for several years. And we're going to read that out of the 12 and 12. So let's start with the first requirement, is that any life run on self-will, which is self-thinking, could hardly be a success.
On that basis, we are always almost in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion.
Self-proportion.
Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way.
Now, this is the first part where he is going to explain about the emotional buildup that we have in an effort to live on self-will. And he's going to talk about this emotional buildup. And he's going to talk about how we go through this to try to fit life to suit us. Keep reading.
If his arrangements would only stay put, if people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous.
Mm-hmm.
He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits.
In other words, we are going to use whatever means that is necessary to get self-will satisfied. We're going to be kind, going to be virtuous, helpful, even self-sacrificing. But keep reading.
What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he really not a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind?
Now, see, Bill is talking about now the emotional instability that we have by using self under our own volition, our thinking. Keep reading.
Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well?
Mm-hmm.
Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony?
Now, see, his thinking, based on self, is producing the actions. It says, does not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate? Keep reading.
Our actor is self-centered, egocentric as people like to call it nowadays. He is like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. Politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up.
Now listen to that. Bill used the businessman, the minister, the safecracker, and the politician. Why would he use those people? Extreme case of self-will run riot. We see it today in our society about greed, about aberrations of self-will. Now, he wrote this book back in 1937. If you know anything about anything spiritual, it stands fast through the annals of time. So we look at the manifestations of self today in our society throughout the criminals, the politicians, the ministers, and the businessmen. So he uses this and he says, whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, and our self-pity? Then he loops us in there and he says, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. I thought that our problem was drinking. No, our drinking is but a symptom of a deeper problem. Because every step after starting with step 3 is designed to reduce self and increase a knowledge of a power greater than yourself. It has nothing to do with drinking. It has to do with increasing the solution of this power to solve our problems. Now, so when we're talking about self-will, and we're talking about how we use it, and we're talking about if we don't use it under the form of the guidelines by which it is given to us, that it causes us problems. And Bill Wilson writes that our drinking is but a symptom. Now with us, our symptom is drinking. With other people, their symptom is greed. Their symptom is going to prison. Their symptom is doing something unseemingly against the cloth. Those symptoms are doing something against their political party. See, all of those are manifestations of self. But with us, it's our drinking. But even though that we drink because of self, we also have manifestations too, like other people. So he's going to say, and he's going to tell us that even though the politicians, the ministers, the safecrackers, and also the businessmen have self, but he's going to tell you what type of self that we have. And he goes on to say, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we've made decisions based on self that later place us in a position to be hurt. Now that's everybody. And then he says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic, now listen to this. There again, he used words very succinctly. The alcoholic is an extreme. And when you look up extreme, extremes means out of the norm. The alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will, self-thinking. Then he says, run riot. And when you look up riot, that means completely and totally out of control. And then he goes on to say, though he usually doesn't think so. Because, see, other people can use self-will, and they can step outside the norms, and someone brings it to their attention, and unless there's some type of psychotic or something, they'll say, oh, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry, you know. But the alcoholics say, oh, no, not me, it's their fault. And if they hadn't done this, I wouldn't have did it. So we're an extreme case of it. There's no way that we can look at ourselves through a sick mind. A sick mind can't heal a sick mind. So it has nothing to do with drinking now. As a matter of fact, we wouldn't let anybody put us through some of the things that we put our own self through. I want you to think about that. So when are we going to stop self-harming, harming ourselves, and blaming other people for it? I don't think there's a person in the room that's ever been tied down and alcohol been poured into their mouths. Just force-fed alcohol. I think that that decision has been made by an emotional buildup to take that drink. And that decision was clearly made through what we call contaminated thinking. Contaminated thinking is when you've got emotional and rational thinking combined. And we believe a lie. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about that in 6 and 7. How we make decisions based on emotions and how we make decisions based on facts and rational thinking. But we can't make decisions based on rational thinking and facts when we have a sick mind, when we are emotional immature, when we have emotional instability. And that emotional instability is based on our resentments, our fears, and our guilt and remorse. See, all of those are feelings, they're not facts. But that's what we do. We make decisions based on our emotions as opposed to making them based on facts and rational thinking. And that's what this does from here on out. Now, let's look at this. He says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. Then he's going to repeat it again. We must, or it kills us. People say there are no musts in the big book. Well, there's 2 right there. And then he says, God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely ridding of self without his aid. Many of us have moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. A sick man cannot fix a sick man. It said we had to have God's help. Now, the question that he asked on page 60, which we omitted to read, and that was to the reader when he said that any requirement, the first requirement is that a life that we be convinced that self-will could hardly be a success. And then he asked the reader, well, what do we mean by that and how do we do it? And this is the answer to it. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God, period. It didn't work. Next, we decided that the hereafter in this drama life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we passed to freedom. He says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer, being all-powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans, our designs. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we become conscious of his presence, we begin to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. Now, we're going to take step 3 together. And as we take step 3, we look at the words to this simple and short prayer. And it says, we were now at step 3, and many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, ready? God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as I will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I may help, thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Now let's look at that prayer a little closer. I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt, not as I want to. And then he says, relieve me of the bondage of self. Now, Bill has already went through the previous pages and described what self is. He's going to go into a greater detail. The handouts that you have on the page where it says the basic instincts of life that creates self. And then he goes on to say that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over my difficulties may bear witness to those that I may help of thy power. The only way that he's going to relieve us of our difficulties is that we help people. Of the power, remember we were powerless. Now we have power in him and through him, and we have love and we have a way of life. Now, Bill Wilson talked about self on pages 60 through 63. But on page 42 in the 12 and 12, years after he'd been sober, he went into a greater detail to explaining what self is. You see, all of us sitting here as human beings, and I believe and I think that this is one of the greatest and simplistic forms to explain how the human being works. Now keep in mind, I'm saying human, not Russian, not Japanese, not British, not American, not African. Humans. All of us have a desire for socialization, to associate. Without us coming together as a society, we could not survive. Do you realize how many people it took to build this hotel? One person couldn't have accomplished this feat. All of us also have a desire for material and emotional security. That's an innate desire that comes from within. You didn't give yourself that desire. And all of us at one time or still today have a desire for sexual relations. Now, the other part is that most of us, especially us men, the only type of sex relation we know is a physical type. But see, there's physical sex and there's emotional sex. And if life is just based on physical sex, when you get along in age and that power's wane and that's all your life is based on, I say you're dead in the water, because everybody's going to lose that power at some time. You didn't give yourself to it. I don't care how much Viagra and whatever else you take, it's going to go if you live. But all of us have those three desires. And this is what he says about self. Page 42 in the 12 and 12. He says, creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Now he talks about creation. He does not say God. At the beginning, he says, creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them, we wouldn't be complete human beings. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no efforts to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. If they didn't reproduce, the earth wouldn't be populated. If there was no social instinct, if men cared nothing for the society of one another, there would be no society. So these desires for the sex relation, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right and surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, often far exceed their proper function. Remember, I was talking about this power of electricity and this power of water. Sometimes it exceeds the proper function. If we take the electricity and the water out of this building would deteriorate. So we have a power that flows through the pipes and the electric wires that give this building life. But it has to be harnessed in a way where it does not exceed its proper function. If it exceeded its proper function, it would flood the floors, what would cause a fire. Self is in the self-same way. It has to have a healthy channel to be able to work the way that it was supposed to. It says, yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, often exceed their proper function. Powerfully, blindly, many times subtly, they drive us, dominate us, and insist upon ruling our lives. Our desires for sex and material and emotional security and for an important place in society often tyrannize us. When thus out of joints, man's natural desires cause him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. Now that's a modest statement, because when we see people throughout the world that exhibit behavior that is contrary to a healthy and a productive society, I don't care what the manifestation is. That is a case of misdirected instincts. It's far exceeding. I like to blow this up on a world stage. The reason we have the problems of today is because of self-will run riot. Man's desire to dominate. Other people to be, their desire to be dependent upon other people. Every problem, from the little boy standing in the corner that took the biscuit, and you ask him, did you eat that biscuit? And crumbs all around his mouth. And he'll say, no, I didn't eat the biscuit. Self-will. From the worst manifestation, we had a fellow, his name was Jeffrey Dahmer. He ate people. Case of self-will run riot. From the little boy to the worst manifestation is a case of self-will out of whack. I like to use out of whack, out of balance, out of kilter. And the reason is we are an extreme case of it. We're going to talk about this a little bit more because we are the only beings that have self-will. You see, an animal have these instincts. They have the instinctual desire to socialize and run in a pack. They have the instinctive desire to be together for security. And they have the instinctual desire for reproduction. But their instincts are 100% controlled by a power greater than themselves. And that's our problem. Remember, I was talking about our complex makeup, our intellect, our emotions, and our decision-making process. See, we make decisions based on self. The animals can't make decisions like that. There is a 100% directed by a power greater than themselves. I've never yet to see a cow on a therapist's couch with a sex problem. And we kind of laugh at that one. But you know what? I've never seen another animal kill another animal out of anger. The only way that they kill each other is either by food or protection, defense. I've yet to see an animal promote sexual abuse to another one. I've yet just seen another animal rape another animal. Kind of humble us a little bit. And we're supposed to be the highest form of intellect. See, they can't do stuff like that. They're completely 100% controlled by a power greater than themselves. They cannot do the atrocities that we can do not only to ourselves, but to others. And we're supposed to have dominance over them. You see, when you look at these animals cannot have sex when they want to. They cannot have sex with whom they want to. They cannot have sex as many times as they want to. And they definitely cannot have sex in any position they want to. That's completely controlled. When they have sex, a condition happens. They come together for reproduction, and when it's over, they're going on their way. But we are more complex than that. Because these instincts that we have some degree of decision in how and when and who we use them. And that's the problem. We got self-will. Now let's listen to what Bill also says. He says, when thus out of joints, man's natural desires cause him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. Nearly every serious emotional problem, see now he talks about the emotional makeup. Nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instincts. When that happens, our great natural assets, the very thing that's supposed to cause us to come together and socialize as a species, the very thing that causes us to come together for security, and the very thing that causes us to come together to reproduce so we can survive as a species, begin to turn against us. When that happens, our great natural assets, the instincts, have turned into physical and mental liabilities. It says, step forward is a vigorous and painstaking effort to discover what these liabilities in each of us have been and are. And this is what he says. We want to find out exactly how, when, and where our natural desires have warped us. Remember, I was telling you about the developmental stages that we go through as human beings. And whenever we get stuck in a particular developmental stage of our emotional well-being or our emotional development, we begin to have emotional deformities. And then he says, we want to look and see where our natural desires have warped us. We wish to look squarely at the unhappiness this has caused others and ourselves. By discovering, now he calls them, the emotional deformities. By discovering what our emotional deformities are, we can move toward their correction. Without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment. Without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment. Now we're talking about emotional sobriety. We can chain you to a tree out there and keep you away from the drinking, you can achieve physical sobriety. But the moment we unlock the chain, the moment you leave out of the meeting, what about emotional sobriety? This is the key to emotional sobriety. We're hoping that we're emphasizing the key because step 3 is the keystone to, it is the first step to whereas we make a decision to go on with the rest of the steps, and that is through the inventory process to remove the thing that block us off from this power. Now he says this, Without a searching and fearless moral inventory, most of us has found that the faith which really works in daily living is still out of reach. So now we're talking about how do we live. Now, let's look at this. He says, suppose before tackling the inventory problem in detail, let's have a closer look at what the basic problem is. Simple examples, like the following, take on a world of a meaning when we think about them. Suppose a person, see, Bill he's pretty modest. Suppose a person placed sex desires ahead of everything else. I wonder why he talks about sex first. Suppose a person placed sex desires ahead of everything else. In such a case, this imperious urge can destroy his chances for material and emotional security as well as his standing in the community. Another may develop such an obsession for financial security that he wants to do nothing but hoard money. Going to the extreme, he can become a miser or even a recluse who denies himself both family and friends. Since no other quest for security are always expressed in the terms of money. How frequently we see a frightened human being determined to depend completely upon a stronger person for guidance and protection. This weak one, failing to meet life responsibilities on his own resources, never grows up. Disillusionment and helplessness are his lot. In time, all his protectors either flee or die, and he is once more left alone and afraid. You see, we depend upon people and upon places and material things instead of a dependence upon a higher power. Because everything we depend upon, here's an enlightenment, an aha. Everything that you see, just look around, everything that you see and that you can see has an expiration date. It will not be here. The things that you can't see are the real things. This building, this candle, everything material is going to deteriorate, and that's including us. If you can see it, it has an expiration date. It's not going to be here. At some point in time, it's going to be gone. But you know what? That's the very thing that we place our dependence upon, what we can see. Not what we can't see. Because what we see is nothing more than matter. And matter is anything that occupies space and time. And we are in time. Let me move to this one page, and then we're going to move right back to that handout that we have. It says, but that is not all the danger. Every time a person imposes his instincts unreasonably upon others, unhappiness follows. And if the pursuit of wealth tramples upon people who happen to be in the way, then anger, jealousy, and revenge are likely to be aroused. If sex run riot again, there's a simple uproar. Demands upon other people for too much attention, protection, and love can only invite domination or revulsion. And the protectors themselves, two emotions quite as unhealthy as the demands which evoke them. When an individual's desire for prestige becomes uncontrollable, whether in the sewing circle or at the international conference table, other people suffer and often revolt. This collision of instincts can produce anything from a cold snub to a blazing revolution. In these ways, we're setting conflict not only with ourselves, but with other people who have instincts too. See, everybody in the room have basic instincts. And when we can recognize and understand our own instincts, then I can be more compassionate or more considerate of your instincts. It is a rule of thumb that if I don't like someone lying to me, guess what? You probably don't like me lying to you. But see, we're selfish individuals. We want people to be fair, straight, and honest and virtuous with us, but when it's our time, we want to be able to kind of cut corners a little bit. We want all the consideration in the world, but at the same time, we don't want to give consideration. That's what self does. Self is a very strong intimation. Let's look at this right quick. When we look at the social instinct, all of us have a desire for companionship. Wanting, to be alone or to be accepted. And sometimes this desire is overused to where we place ourselves in a situation to be doormats, or we place ourselves in a situation where we want to try to buy companionship. Now keep in mind that everybody has self. And there's no way you can control self. It is very hard for a person not to misuse another person. If you lay yourself out to them, it's hard for a person to refuse something, especially if they need something. But at the same time, you laying yourself out to them, you have hidden motives and why are you doing it, and they have hidden motives why they're accepting it. Prestige, wanting to be recognized or to be accepted as a leader. Now, most of us don't want to be a leader, but we do want to be recognized to the point whereas if someone steps on our foot, we want someone to at least say, excuse me, I'm sorry. Or if we go into the department store and we're purchasing some goods and we're standing there waiting to be waiting on, and the clerks are standing over there just jabbering away looking at us and still talking, that sort of raised our dander a little bit. Excuse me, So we want to be recognized as a human being. It can be from that, or it can be all the way to the prestige of a leader. Or, here we are sitting in this room. If tragedy strikes, the very least likely person is going to rise to the top and says, okay, everybody, calm down. This is what we're going to do. A leader is going to arise out of this. Most of us are going to get emotional, screaming, wondering what to do. Somebody with some common sense is going to say, calm down. A leader will emerge out of this. Because all of us at some point in time had the ability to be able to lead throughout a problem. Self-esteem, now that's a tricky one. And listen to what it says, self-esteem, not high, not low. If we think high of ourselves, and if we think other people think high of ourselves, then our self-esteem is high. If we think low of ourselves, and other people think low of us, our self-esteem is low. At best, it's varied. See, self-esteem is something that goes up and goes down. It's waning. And our society that we live in tells us that the way to build your self-esteem is to have a certain education, become a certain part of a certain group, live in a certain neighborhood, have a certain economic value, and have a certain character, albeit false. And you're supposed to feel good. Well, that does, but it's temporary. Let's use the example. Person goes to university, they get what we call a bachelor's degree, which is the first level of education, and for a while they feel great. They're proud, except for when a person walks in with a master's degree. It drops a little bit. You see, it's not permanent, it's a temporary thing. Another example is that James buy 750 BMW. And I go by the self-same car. And James is proud of it. He's got his car of his dreams. Everything, all the whistles and the buttons and the bells. And he's proud of this car. And I go buy one exactly like it. And James is proud for me, and he's proud for himself. Except when I tell him what I paid for mine. Whoop, it's going to drop. He's not going to be satisfied with that car. That's what self does. There's no way that we can satisfy self. You see, self is something more powerful than us. I can have a cake and cut the cake in half. And the cake can be ever so slightly larger than one piece. And out of my loyalty and out of my big character, I can give the larger piece to Brian. Now here, Brian, you take the big piece. I'll take the small one. And I feel good about that because I've sacrificed. But now, when there's another cake cut, and Brian automatically takes the larger piece, I'm going to say, now, Brian, it's my time to take the larger piece this time. You remember when I gave it to you last time? So why was I giving it to him in the first place? You see, self is something that causes us to be selfish. And we're going to talk about that in the inventory. When we try to control self, and remember we read on page 63 about being virtuous, self-sacrifice, mean, egotistical. With most humans, it gets varied traits. Now this, what we're talking about, is our thinking and our will and how we go about to satisfy self. And as long as we try to satisfy self, we're going to experience all of this emotional buildup. As you look at the bottom of your page, you see in the center, if we try to use self to satisfy these, we're going to develop resentments, we're going to develop fears, and we're going to have harms and hurts through guilt and remorse by taking wrong actions. So therefore, in order for self to be healthy, we're going to have to turn self over to a power greater than yourself. And this is the decision that we begin to make in step 3, is something that most people don't recognize. Now, why this is important is because what we're going to inventory in step 4 is all the things that come out of our ability and our effort to live a life based on self. And that is, we're going to have to inventory the resentments, the fears, the guilt, remorse through harms and hurts done through our sexual conduct. This is why this is of the utmost importance that we understand what self is. Now, let's look at pride. Most of us have been raised to have pride. When we go to 6 and 7, we're going to see that the opposite of pride is humility. Now, I don't have to tell you which one that you probably want. But we're raised to have pride. Have pride about this, have pride about that. Well, I surmise to you that the only thing that we can have pride in is the fact that we know and understand an all-powerful and loving Creator. Because everything that we have as a result of that is of Him, even to the point of the breath that you breathe right now. The breath that you breathe right now is not yours. Now, if you think it is, hold your breath and try to keep it in. Don't share your breath. By the very virtue of the principles that we're talking about, that in order to keep it, you got to give it away. As we sit here and we do that right now, unbeknownst. So in order to have life, we've got to give life. And even that we're garnered in a spiritual fashion, so to speak, that we have a symbiosis as human beings on the face of the earth to the plant kingdom. They emit carbon dioxide. We emit carbon dioxide and they emit oxygen. The plants give us oxygen. That's why it's of utmost important that we have the plant life. See, we have a symbiosis. Let me say this while I'm at it. I want you to consider this and think about this. And I'm going to take a disclaimer. When I'm emphasizing this, I am not angry. I am not trying to, what I'm trying to do is evoke thought, pure, clean, honest thought, not emotions. I want you to think about what I'm saying. Because we as human beings, we sit here with all of our intellect and we believe that we are separate from a power greater than ourselves. There's no way. We have a symbiosis, and it's called oxygen. There's something that gives us life, whereas we give life to the plant kingdom. And when you look up the word spirit, in your English Oxford Dictionary, one of the definitions for spirit is going to say breath of life. So that means we have spirit in our body through the breath of life. None of you all will never know what leanings, if any, of my religious background. But what you will understand is that I do believe in a power greater than myself and through spirit. I'll never talk about that, because that excludes people. What we're talking about is inclusive. And what I'm talking about is spiritual things where we can look at, where we can readily agree upon, and simplistic. That's why I'm using everything. Any food can take a complex matter. Any food can take a simple matter and complex it. And I'm using all this in me and emphasizing the importance of it, trying to make something simple. Albeit I don't do a very good job sometimes, but I'm doing my very best to do this. Because this book that we have is something that is simple, but not easy, but it is simple. And the only thing that we have to do is open our minds and be willing to believe just a little bit different than we walked in the room with. If we believe just a little bit different than what we walked in the room, this power that I'm talking about will cause us to believe a little bit more. It will open your belief. I don't have that power to do it. The understanding will come to you from your own volition. We got about 9 minutes left, and I want to emphasize this very strongly, what I'm talking about. We have 5 finite senses. And these senses, albeit that they're flawed, but they're the best thing that we have to garner and gather information from the outside world, from the material world, from the physical world. I said it in this way. What we see and what we hear and what we taste and what we touch, all of that stuff is through physical senses. But our book says that we have to develop a vital sixth sense. And that sixth sense is our own personal and individual way of understanding. You see, when we look at it, we have never had a problem with our understanding of anything. It's other people's understanding we have a problem with. Now, let me give you this. Everybody in the room can either do one of 3 things. Most of us can do all 3. And the reason that these things are difficult is because it takes cognitive and motor skills. In other words, you have to think and do at the same time. And the most simplest thing is tie your shoe. Seems difficult in the beginning. Seems like you'd never get it done. because you had to think and do at the same time. But finally, you learn how to tie your shoe. Another thing is, some of us in the rooms know how to ride a cycle, a bicycle. That's a very difficult thing to do. The third thing is driving a motor vehicle. You see, when we started riding a bicycle or driving a car, the only thing that we did is believe that we could do it. It looked like it was fun, and we believed that we could do it. But guess what? Our belief that we started with was not true. We got on this cycle, and we was wiggling and carrying on. Now, we didn't stop believing. We just adjusted our belief. No one did it for us. The desire was still there to ride this cycle. So what you believed when you got on is not what you believed when you got off. And when we're talking about believing in the power of greater than yourself, it is as simple as that. When you get in this motor vehicle, you think you can drive. You believe you can drive. But you get in there and you come up off the clutch too fast and it goes dead. Now, you didn't just quit believing, but you adjusted it. And you learn how to give it more acceleration, and you learn how to get up off it. Albeit, you probably burn a few clutches out. But you did not stop believing. Now, today, you don't get in there on what you believe. You get in there on what you know. When you drive home, you're driving home on what you know and not what you believe. And guess what? No two people have the same understanding about how to drive. Case in point, I can ask Caroline, how do I get to London? Caroline will tell me you take the M5, the M6 or whatever, and then I can ask Maria and she says, well, you take the M16 or whatever. Two different ways in understanding and how to get there. It's not but one London. Now, both of them are right, but their understanding is different. So each of us have the ability to understand this one power if we're willing to change what we believe. I can't change what you believe. You have to be willing to change what you believe. And you don't have to change it that much, just this much. Just crack it open. You see, what we believe is what we are. Our belief is the strongest power that we have. But it's how you use it that's important. You can use your belief against you, or you can use your belief for you. That's why it says, came to believe. That means you have to move from where you are to something a little bit greater. So when we talk about understanding this power, so today we found out that we had something that we didn't know that we had, and that was basic instincts. Now all these desires that we've had all of our lives, now we understand why we have them, because that is for our survival. But the same desires that we have for our survival has exceeded their proper function. My survival is not more important than yours. My rights are no more important than your rights. And people get mixed up, and it's as simple as this. My rights stop where your rights start. I don't have the right to impose my rights upon you. And this principle of this program that we live is this. When we talk about spiritual anonymity, because we have an extreme case of self-will run riot, then the other spectrum of that is I give up my right to be right at the expense of you being wrong. Now, what I mean by that is I can be 100% right and you can be 100% wrong, and I have no desire to prove me right and you wrong. I will allow you to be wrong for the sake of you becoming right. But most of us have the desire of trying to prove ourselves right, especially in our meetings. We can be right, but see, why do we have the desire to prove that we're right and to impose our rightness on someone else? See, that's self. Everybody in the room has a right to be wrong, as much as you have a right to be right. But we have this desire to prove that you're wrong, and that's selfish. That's using honesty in unrighteousness. You can be right and you can tell the truth, but it's your your intent and your motive, how you're using it. Are you using it for sake of correction, or are you using it trying to put your fellow man down or prove yourself superior? See, self is something else. And we'll say, well, I'm just trying to help. Poppycock. You trying to prove yourself superior or trying to press somebody down through your being right. See, when we talk about spiritual things, our 12th tradition says spiritual anonymity, principles before personalities. But we got to show our personalities. And that's through self. So the point is that we cannot exhaust learning about the basic instincts of life. And here's another kicker. We're not going to be able to get rid of all these character defects. But what we do have is a mechanism and an avenue by which we can move them back in the proper context where they don't far exceed their proper function. And when they get out of the way, we can move them back over there where they don't affect us and don't affect other people. This is the key to recovery. This is the keystone step. This is step 3. This is what we all must make an individual decision to turn the satisfaction and the completion of these basic instincts over to a power greater than ourselves. Why should we do that? Because we've tried all our life to do contrary and it's damn near killed us. By running on self-will, self-thinking. Now we have an avenue and we have the knowledge and how to move toward these corrections. That's a lot in step 3, ain't it? Well, we still got some work in step 4 and how to carry out this decision. So when we come back from lunch, we're going to talk about the way that we carry out this decision, and we're going to look at on page 64, and we're going to see the directions and how we carry out the decision to remove the thing that block us off from this power, this understanding that's going to solve all of our problems. Let's come back. Thank you for your time and attention.